Well, good evening and welcome to the first IISS Oberoi Lecture. The International Institute for Strategic Studies is delighted and honored to establish the IISS Oberoi Lecture and Discussion Forum series in close collaboration with the Oberoi Group. I want to thank Mr. PRS Oberoi for his inspired and generous support to this effort. Our joint goal is to bring regularly to Mumbai high-profile personalities with important public policy or business responsibilities from around the world to speak on some of the pressing issues of our time. We will do this principally in the form of public lectures, like this inaugural one tonight, and occasionally in the form of smaller private discussion dinners. It was a pleasure for Mr. Oberoi and I to host Robert Zoellick, until recently President of the World Bank, at the first IISS Oberoi Discussion Forum last month. Over the next months and years, we will want to ensure that the most responsible and influential individuals from North America, Europe, Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America come to see the IISS Oberoi Lecture and Discussion Forums as a central element of their visits to India and specifically to Mumbai. We look forward to seeing you, leaders of the Mumbai business and financial community, principal contributors to its intellectual life and media, to engage them in spirited debate and ensure they leave India with a stronger sense, too, of the perspective on world affairs as seen from here. The IISS Oberoi Lecture and Discussion Forums will, I trust, become a strong magnet for key individuals to convene and debate new global issues and their international impact in the service of developing better public policy and more informed appreciation of the business perspective in framing that public policy. The IISS is headquartered in London, with offices also in Washington, Singapore, and Bahrain, as well as a presence in New Delhi. We have corporate members and clients in over 100 countries. We are the leading think tank for the analysis of international conflict, however caused, that may have an important military component. We analyze political risk and provide facts, rather than just opinion, on the world's evolving security situation. We look at international relations from an international perspective and with an international staff. We have added recently to our wide portfolio of public policy analysis a new stream of work on geoeconomics and strategy. The IISS Geoeconomics and Strategy program is led full-time by Dr. Sanjaya Baru, formerly editor of the Business Standard, who will chair the questions and answers at this evening's lecture. In addition to publishing authoritative analysis on international geostrategic and geoeconomic issues and encouraging public debate on these issues, we also bring together governments in circumstances that they are not able to arrange for themselves. 11 years ago, for example, we established the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore that brings together all the defense ministers of the Asia-Pacific as well as key outside powers. This IISS summit is now recognized as the key trans-regional defense diplomatic institution of the Asia-Pacific. Its creation by the IISS is proof that to assist smooth relations between governments, sometimes the privatization of defense diplomacy, like the privatization of other things, is a good idea. It is an idea that we have transplanted also to the Gulf with the establishment of the Manama Dialogue in Bahrain that similarly brings together the national security advisors and foreign ministers of the Gulf region, the wider Middle East, and key powers from Asia, Europe, and North America. The IISS over several decades has had a strong relationship with successive governments in India, whose leaders have attended our events and whose officials have absorbed our research. We are keen now to deepen our relationship with the Indian business community. The IISS Oberoi and Discussion Forum series will be an important and we hope enduring element of that engagement. I look forward to many visits here and to learn more of how we can help ensure that the perspective from Mumbai and from India more generally at large infuses international debates with even greater vigor. If there is one issue that the financial and business community around the world is most concerned by and even perplexed by at present, it is the question of the future of the euro and the European Union. A fitting subject for our first Oberoi lecture, therefore, is the euro and the future of Europe. To deliver that lecture, it is excellent that we have with us tonight the person charged with doing everything within the power of at least 780 billion euro to preserve the currency and help prepare the foundations for future European growth. Dr. Klaus Regling is CEO of the European Financial Stability Facility that was established by the euro area member states following decisions taken by ECOFIN in May 2010. Its mandate is to safeguard the financial stability in Europe by providing financial assistance to euro area member states. The EFSF is backed by guarantee commitments from the euro area member states of 780 billion and has a lending capacity of 440 billion euro. Dr. Regling has served in the IMF, the German Finance Ministry, and as a Director General in the European Commission. He has worked in the private sector for More Capital Strategy Group and has researched at the Lee Kuan Yew School in Singapore the prospects for financial and economic integration in Asia. He therefore brings to his CEO role at the EFSF the perfect mix of qualities to lead this vital institution. That mix he also brings tonight to us in delivery of the first IISS Oberoi Lecture. Dr. Regling, the floor and this podium is yours.
Good evening, dear Governor Subbarao, John Chipman, Sanjaya Baru. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be invited to deliver this first IISS Oberoi Lecture. It's a particular honor to be here in Mumbai a few days after India's 65th anniversary as an independent state, on which I want to congratulate all of you. As you all know, we live in a globalized world where interconnectedness and mutual dependence are on an ever-increasing trend. Where better to see this than in Mumbai? Globalization can be very enjoyable during good times. It becomes much more complex during difficult times. As we are entering a difficult patch in the world economy, with a simultaneous slowdown in many developed and emerging economies, it is also more important to be well informed about developments in different parts of the world. It is in this spirit that I want to offer you my thoughts about the situation in Europe, the euro, and the future of European integration. Many believe that Europe is in a big mess. The sovereign debt crisis has lasted 3 years, and there seems to be no end in sight. Every day I see headlines and market commentary about the imminent breakup of the euro area, Greek exiting the euro, fiscal adjustment and improvements in competitiveness that were possible in Northern Europe are allegedly not possible in the South. Another rating downgrade, another increase in spreads, too small firewalls in Europe, too little action, too late by political leaders. I'm sure such comments are familiar to all of you. Has then the creation of Economic and Monetary Union, EMU, been a mistake, a failure? No, it has not. The euro is a currency that is the outcome of a long history of monetary and economic cooperation and integration dating back to the collapse of the Bretton Woods system in 1971. Even during the 70s, after the collapse of the Bretton Woods system, European countries tried to limit changes in the exchange rates of their different currencies in order to protect intra-European trade. In 1979, the European exchange rate mechanism was created European monetary cooperation has survived many crises, and the Maastricht Treaty, ratified in 1992, paved the way for the creation of the euro. The eventual launch of EMU in 1999 was only possible because of this long history of increasing integration and convergence. The euro is the result of a process that lasted 4 decades, and its importance for Europe has to be assessed in this long-term perspective. It would also be a mistake to see the euro narrowly, exclusively as a project of economics. The euro is one of the defining pillars of today's European Union. Of a union, of course, which also is developing a common foreign and defense policy, which fights cross-border crime and terrorism, which is based on shared values, democracy, and legal certainty, in addition to the economic side of open borders and the single market. This is also the context against which EMU must be seen. However, we are in a crisis in Europe, and there are reasons for this crisis. Easy access to borrowing helped governments to postpone needed reforms for a long time. Economic policies did not take sufficiently into account the constraints of being a member of EMU and sharing one currency. Too low risk premia and too little differentiation during the boom years revealed the market's failure to price risks properly. Too much leveraging during good times has resulted in debt overhang in many parts of the euro area. The global financial crisis exposed the homegrown weaknesses in Europe in the same way as it revealed problems elsewhere. What has then been the response, the European response at the national and the union level to get its house in order again? What is the vision of the future Europe, and how can we get there? Let me address these questions in turn with a focus on Europe and global implications in the background. Let me first turn to the present situation in Europe. I will use this opportunity to challenge mainstream media and market wisdom by demonstrating to you that the European adjustment strategy is delivering results. Despite the lack of confidence of market participants and the skepticism of the broad public, member states of the euro area and the European Union have made significant progress at the national level towards reducing macroeconomic imbalances. In addition, economic surveillance has been strengthened, more efficient financial market supervision is being put in place, and several institutional gaps of EMU are being closed. The reforms implemented at national level, in conjunction with strengthening of economic governance and growth-enhancing measures taken at the EU level, have started to deliver results. Let me offer some facts to convince you, because I see the skepticism in your faces. First, the euro area as a whole had a fiscal deficit of about 4% of GDP in 2011, down from more than 6% in 2009 and 2010, and this is less than half of the deficits of the United States or Japan. The euro area is projected to have a fiscal deficit below 3% of GDP next year. Most importantly, the countries in the periphery have delivered sizable fiscal adjustment, and deficits are on an improving trend in all program countries, with Greece continuing to face the biggest challenges. Spain and Italy have started far-reaching consolidation and reform programs to reform labor markets, pension systems, and crack down on tax evasion. Indeed, Italy is expected to have its budget balanced next year. All EU member states have budgetary consolidation paths in place with a clear objective to reach the balanced budget during the next few years. I'm confident that if countries stick to their adjustment programs and as time passes, incoming data will validate quarter by quarter that the situation is stabilizing and that Europe has turned the corner for the better. You will then see confidence returning, reducing volatility and yields. We just need some more patience, and we need to work hard on the remaining problems. Second, with the significant adjustment at the national level, macroeconomic imbalances within the euro area are clearly declining. Europe has suffered from substantial internal imbalances. Indeed, large current account deficits and large divergences in competitiveness were symptoms of past excesses. However, current account deficits and competitiveness of the Eurozone's peripheral economies have been improving significantly during the past 3 years. Ireland shows now a current account surplus after sizable deficits in earlier years. Spain is getting very close to a current account balance after deficits of about 10% in 2007 and 2008. Also, Greece and Portugal have reduced their current account deficits by 2/3. This is due to export growth in all southern European countries, rather than import compression. As important, the current account surplus of Germany is steadily declining. Likewise, nominal unit labor cost, as an important measurement of competitiveness, have declined significantly in the periphery and are increasing in Germany, underpinning the story of rebalancing. The competitiveness gap between Northern Europe and Southern Europe that amounted to nearly 50 percentage points in 2007 and 2008 has been cut in half. This demonstrates the significant progress on the one hand, but also shows that countries in the periphery must continue their adjustment process. Third, the repair of the European banking system is advancing, and banks' capitalization is improving. All major European banks that had a capital shortfall have raised their capitalization to comply with stricter rules and meet the 9% Tier 1 capital requirement by end June 2012. So they all met this. 3/4 of the additional capital requirement came from capital increases and only 1/4 through the reduction in assets, thus avoiding excessive deleveraging. Spain, as you know, is due to receive up to 100 billion euros, equivalent to 10% of the Spanish GDP, to recapitalize its banking sector, which has suffered from the bursting of the Spanish property bubble. Bank recapitalization has been a major element also in the Irish, Greek, and Portuguese programs, and will be so in the Cypriot program, which is under consideration. As a result, European banks will be on a much sounder footing going forward, ready and able to finance the real economy. Fourth, inflation risks in the euro area are well contained, with headline inflation on average just slightly above 2%. The risk of deflation in the euro area, often emphasized by Anglo-Saxon analysts, but also the IMF in its latest Article 4 review, is minimal in my view. The adjustment path I described is needed to undo past excesses, but it does mean, unfortunately, that Europe is slow to return to growth. Undoing excesses of the past implies contraction in output in the short term. This path to a new equilibrium with lower real income is very similar to post-crisis years and earlier crisis episodes. For example, during the Asian crisis or the Russian crisis in 1997-98, or Turkey in 1999-2000, or the Latin American crisis in the 80s and 90s. Real incomes initially need to shrink to regain competitiveness. And while this happens, domestic demand and GDP growth are low or negative. While painful, it is necessary to build a solid foundation for sustainable growth in the future. There is no real alternative for solving the problem of debt overhang and regaining fiscal and financial stability. I disagree with those who argue that a devaluation would be an easier way out to improve competitiveness. It wasn't so in the 90s, and it is not so now. It is structural reforms which make countries competitive in a sustainable way, in the past and again now. As devaluations are not possible anyway in the monetary union, cuts in nominal income are an inevitable part of the adjustment process. I know this view is against Anglo-Saxon textbooks, which do not foresee this possibility, but I think these textbooks have to be rewritten as European countries demonstrate that cuts in nominal income can improve competitiveness quickly. If the adjustment and reforms are duly implemented, Europe will be back on its long-term potential growth path of the order of 1 to 2% real growth. This may seem low, may seem like underperformance to many, but one has to be realistic. At Europe's level of GDP per capita, which is close to the global technological frontier, and given our negative demographic trends, 1 to 2% real growth is what the euro area can sustainably achieve over the next decade. Remember that on a per capita basis, growth in Europe and the United States has been identical during the last 20 years. People always have the wrong impression when they look at headline growth, but looking at it on a per capita basis, it's really striking that Europe and the US have a very, very similar experience. Of course, it is true that weaker demand from Europe has an impact on many exporting countries, including India, and on world trade. Europe still represents 20% of the global economy, and the EU is the largest trading partner for most countries around the world. However, the flip side of the coin is that the bubble years until 2007 inflated global demand above sustainable trend. Ladies and gentlemen, I have tried to explain that the response to the crisis at the national level has been significant and results are increasingly visible, even though widely ignored. It is a combination of these national reforms and strengthened economic governance at European level that is the key to overcoming the sovereign debt crisis. And this is what is happening. Market pressure has been an important driver for reforms, which not only involve fiscal consolidation, current account adjustments, and improvements in competitiveness, as discussed earlier, but equally important, improving the governance of the European Union and the euro area. European governments have done a great deal to address the problems that accumulated during the first decade of EMU and which became so visible during the global crisis. They have identified the main weaknesses at national and European level, and they are tackling them in a way that will profoundly change governance and economic decision-making and policy-making in the euro area. First, we have in Europe agreed on the so-called Fiscal Compact. This new treaty which is in the final stage of ratification by all euro area member states and 8 other EU countries, provides for strengthened coordination of fiscal and economic policy. It sets out binding budgetary rules, including automatic sanctions, which member states will enshrine in their national legislations. This will help to put government finances on a sustainable footing. It is an important step towards creating a stability union and resolving the sovereign debt crisis. The Fiscal Compact strengthens the Stability and Growth Pact and enhances deeper fiscal coordination. Member states are required to make significant progress towards balanced budgetary positions. Expenditure benchmarks will now be used alongside the structural budget balance to assess adjustments in budgetary positions. Also, for the first time, a controlled reduction of debt ratios to 60% of GDP is required. Both the reduction of the deficit and the reduction of total debt are subject to a new sanctions procedure. Resolutions proposed by the European Commission can be adopted even against a majority of euro area countries. This reduces the possibility of political interference significantly. Second, the so-called European semester represents another major improvement. In the first half of every year, member states' budgetary and structural policies are reviewed by the Commission and by partner countries. It will enable consistent policy guidance early enough so that member states can take this into account when they adopt budgets in their national parliaments for the following year. This European semester recasts in a very substantial way how the euro area conducts its economic policy making. For the first time, spillover effects to other member states will be taken into account before national budgets are decided by parliaments. The European Commission has pushed for this approach for many years, but evidently a crisis was needed for the member states to give up their resistance. Third, a new macroeconomic imbalances procedure will complement the Fiscal Compact by aiming to detect and avoid excessive imbalances. Where excessive macroeconomic imbalances exist, repeated failures to follow recommendations by the European Commission will result in sanctions. Although all member states will be analyzed, the procedure is clearly focused on member states with weak competitiveness and large current account deficits. Again, Europe is closing a structural gap. In the past, imbalances could become excessive, and we know they did, as there was no designated procedure to address them. And fourth, last but not least, Europe has created strong firewalls. The establishment of a robust euro area crisis management framework has filled another missing piece from the initial design of EMU. Financial crisis management mechanisms, the current EFSF and the future ESM, form the centerpiece of this framework and serve as powerful financial backstops. They can buy time for euro area member states to do their homework, as the IMF does globally. Let me put the financial side of the European response in perspective. By providing financial assistance to troubled euro area members and committing to lend money in support of the global economy through the IMF, Europe has mobilized about $1.5 trillion, of which 2/3 are still available for disbursement. Europe has committed almost 200 billion euro to the 2 Greek assistance packages, 45 billion euro to Ireland and 52 billion euro to Portugal. It has agreed to lend up to 100 billion euro for the recapitalization of Spanish banks. This is almost twice the amount the IMF has currently committed to the financing of adjustment programs worldwide, including those in Europe. The European Stability Mechanism, the ESM, when ratified next month, stands ready to provide 500 billion euro in fresh money, which comes in addition to the existing almost 200 billion in EFSF commitments to Greece, Ireland, and Portugal. Also, the ECB, the European Central Bank, has intervened on the secondary market, purchasing bonds for 220 billion euro. 2 weeks ago, the ECB made it clear that it will not accept higher sovereign bond yields attributable to fears of the breakup of the euro. The euro is irreversible. The ECB decided it may undertake outright open market operations of a size adequate to reach this objective. However, in the future, any intervention from the ECB to support a particular member state will be conditional on the involvement of the EFSF, ESM, and thus subject to strict conditionality. The ECB and the EFSF, ESM are ready to act in concert if a member state requests financial assistance, thus ensuring conditionality while alleviating market fears about the size of the firewall. The success of the EFSF as an issuer is of fundamental importance for the borrowing countries, of course. These countries benefit directly from the low interest rates the EFSF is paying as the cost of funding of the EFSF below 2.5% for 10-year bonds, and recently at negative interest rates for 3 and 6 months bills. This low cost of funding is directly passed through to borrowing countries. As a consequence, the EFSF's success in issuance delivers substantial budgetary savings for borrowing countries. The EFSF has become an established issuer in the sovereign, supranational, and agency category. We have been able to issue at competitive terms, even at the most difficult market conditions. Our client base is large and well diversified, both geographically and in terms of investor type. Our latest 3-year bond auction on the 31st of July was oversubscribed 3.7 times with an average yield of 0.54%. So just 0.5% interest rate on 3-year bonds. Only very few top-rated sovereigns pay less. We have also first signs in markets that the European response is working at country level. Ireland has taken its first step to return to the markets by successfully placing its first 5-year bond after being cut off from markets during the last 1.5 years. Now, have all problems been solved? Of course not. But Europe is moving in the right directions. Europe has committed to do whatever is necessary to safeguard the euro and the financial stability of the euro area. And you can trust me, that's what we really mean. We do have the means and resources to deliver. What is the vision of the future Europe and how can we get there? Discussions are underway to advance with 4 unions: Banking Union, Fiscal Union, Economic Union, and in parallel, Political Union. The first of the 4 unions, Banking Union, stands on 3 building blocks: a single European banking supervisor, a common EU deposit guarantee fund, and a bank resolution framework. The banking union should include all euro area members, but it may be open to other EU member states who wish to join later. During the euro area summit in June, there was a clear decision as a first step to proceed swiftly with the establishment of the single supervisor. The European Central Bank will have a leading function in this regard and ultimate responsibility at the European level. National supervisors who possess the knowledge of financial institutions and local circumstances will be involved in the implementation of pan-European supervision. One could envision the ESM taking the lead in implementing another building block, operating a common deposit guarantee fund and resolution framework. But this has not been decided, and once the single European supervisor is established, and if the ESM is mandated to participate in bank recapitalizations directly, these tasks would create complementarity and synergy. Second, several proposals are under consideration to move towards stronger fiscal union. If the improved fiscal coordination rules which I described are fully implemented, the euro area will function better. However, markets have become so skeptical about the design of the euro area that a qualitative jump towards fiscal and economic union may be needed. Hence, while many important steps towards better fiscal governance of the euro area have already been taken, the pooling of decision-making and ultimately pooling of risks could be pursued further. However, a further pooling of risks would not be adequate before today's crisis is resolved and before enhanced coordination and stricter enforcement of rules have become an established practice. It means, for example, a greater ex-ante say at the collective level over individual members' debt and deficits. Third, stronger economic union assumes advanced economic policy coordination and further integration of markets. We have learned the bitter way of what the costs are of limited policy coordination, which resulted in significant macroeconomic imbalances and misallocation of investment. Also, to fully unleash the potential of our single market with 500 million citizens, we in Europe need to tear down the remaining walls that hamper cross-border trade and commerce. Opening up closed professions, promoting e-commerce and lifelong learning are just a few essential steps in Europe, like in many other countries of the world, in order to exploit our growth potential fully. And finally, and the crisis has made this very clear, we need a stronger political union. Stronger union rests on stronger legitimacy, stronger democratic foundations, and a clear roadmap indicating how we will get there. To make sure that European citizens have a greater say in electing their leadership, and the elected have a clear accountability. The ratification process of the ESM Treaty has already sparked a debate in many European countries over the balance of power of national parliaments and collective decision-making at European level. In my own country, in Germany, but also in Estonia and Ireland, the legitimacy of the ESM was brought before the constitutional courts. The role of the European Parliament, in cooperation with national parliaments, will become ever more important in the future. Proposals are also on the table to elect directly by the entire population a president with an enhanced executive role, combining the roles of today's Commission President and the EU President. But one has to be realistic about the timeline for these proposals. It could take a decade to implement these ideas into reality as changes in the EU treaty and changes in national constitutions are required. But Europe is determined to begin that process now, and the European Summit will examine relevant proposals at their meetings in October and December. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude. A strong and stable euro is in the interest of Europe. It is also in the interest of the rest of the world. Since the beginning of European integration more than 60 years ago, the ultimate goal of the European project has always been to bring prosperity and stability to Europe while being a reliable partner for the world. Great efforts have been made at the national and the European level to overcome the current crisis. Institutional gaps in the initial design of EMU are being closed. I'm confident that a year from now, you will be hearing more good news from Europe as hard data will show progress in overcoming macroeconomic imbalances and additional decisions in our move towards the banking, fiscal, economic, and political union are adopted. In responding to the crisis, Europe is taking historic steps. This will ultimately benefit its citizens and the world at large. Thank you very much for your attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will take some questions. I'd request you to be brief, introduce yourself and ask a question. If you stand up, the mic will come to you. Yes, Lata.
I'm Lata Venkatesh from CNBC TV 18. Mr. Regling, do you think it is impossible the German court will hold the ESM illegal or unconstitutional? You seem to indicate that you're largely going to expect good news. So you don't think that a possibility?
It's not totally impossible, but most observers in Germany and in Europe expect that the German Constitutional Court, when they rule on the 12th of September, will approve the setup of the ESM. Everything else would be a big surprise. So clearly, I also expect that result. But we know courts are independent and surprises are possible, so I cannot say it's totally excluded. But it's a very high probability that they will approve what has been agreed by governments and already ratified by the German parliament, by the way, with a large majority of 80%.
But what if it rules the mechanism as unconstitutional? What may be the legal, political, game plan thereafter?
Well, there's no plan B because the probability of this happening is so small. But I would assume that if this were to happen against all odds, that there would be a European summit very quickly to decide on the appropriate steps. It will not be the end of our efforts, but again, it's very unlikely to happen.
Next. Yes, sir. Yes, Ms. Vaidyanathan.
Some of the political leaders have, I think, shown a healthy cynicism of markets, and I emphasize healthy. But if you look at the United States in 2008, Lehman was an important event which triggered an event risk. But because the political, regulatory, and the central bank were empowered, they were jointly able to embark on certain steps which helped get over the event risk. In the case of Europe, I don't think the structural risk is as much a risk as you explain. You're fixing a car in motion and redesigning the car in the process. But the three pieces, which is the political, regulatory, and the central bank being on the same page with the same power to move quickly, should there be a market event, and a market can throw up surprises. Is that something that would concern you about coming together in a concerted fashion to address an event risk?
I think it's fair to say that we in Europe have a comparative disadvantage here because we are dealing with 17 countries, 17 democracies, and that is more difficult than coming to an understanding within one country. Although remember that even the United States, the first attempt to bring TARP through Congress failed. There was a negative vote and a quite strong market reaction. So this can happen even in one country. In Europe, though, it is more complicated. There are 17 democracies that share the euro. And when there's a new problem, of course, in each of the 17 countries, there has to be a national debate. The governments have to talk with their parliaments, with the public at large, with the media. It's unavoidable. And it would be a big surprise if the debate in all 17 countries were to move in the same direction from the beginning. So necessarily it is a longer process than in one country. But it's important to remember that whenever we had new problems during the last 2-3 years in Europe, at the end there was always a consensus. This is often forgotten by the casual observer because the controversy may take 2 months, and this is headline news every day or every week. While then at the end of this long process and noisy process, there is a consensus, often at 2 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday. It's too late for the newspapers to write about it the next day. And on Tuesday, it's old news, so they don't write about it. So that's why many people miss that after this long controversial process, there is always a consensus. And we always had a successful conclusion of each of these controversial processes. But it does take time, and that is really a comparative disadvantage we have with our setup. We try to improve. We try to strengthen decision-making processes. I talked about strengthening of the rules, which will help to speed up decision-making. But I think there will always be some time-consuming national debate necessary when new problems come up.
TCA?
You stand up.
Mr. McCly, and I'll come back here.
Yeah, Jamal McCly. Do you believe that in the limit, the competitiveness differentials between, let's say, Germany and Greece, or any two countries, can in fact be effectively, completely eliminated? Because to me, that's the real issue.
Yes, absolutely. That is one of the key issues. There's also the issue of budgetary solidity, and the deficits in Greece and some other countries became too big and debt levels too high. But competitiveness, current account deficits were one of the main causes of this crisis. I didn't bring any slides, but you can see some of the material on the website of the EFSF. I talked about it. There is significant improvement in competitiveness. When I look at the first 8-9 years of monetary union, from 1999 to 2007, and compare Germany and Greece, the two countries you mentioned, the divergence in competitiveness had become 50 percentage points. So if I take the starting point in 1999 as 100, German competitiveness stays at 100. Greece had moved in unit labor costs to 150. So it means unit labor costs in Greece during the first 9 years of EMU increased 50% more than in Germany. But then there was a turning point already in 2008, even in Greece, but also in Ireland, Spain, Portugal. So even before Lehman, the turning point was there. It's quite clear in the data. And unit labor costs have been falling in all southern European countries since, and also in Ireland. And now the difference between Greece on the one hand and Germany on the other is 20%. So it was 50 in 2008, now it's 20%, which means it's not over the adjustment, it needs to continue, but the progress is significant, much more than most people are aware. The data are very clear on this. In this year alone, unit labor costs in Greece are falling by 8% because they have cuts in nominal wages, salaries, pensions. Costs are coming down. Unit labor costs in Germany are going up by 3% because they have a good cyclical situation. So in this year alone, the difference shrinks by 11%. This is the kind of progress I tried to explain, which is not well known, not reported in the media, the markets ignore it. It's really progress that's there. If it continues, this part of the problem on the budgets and competitiveness will be over in 2 years.
So I have two brief questions. One is...
Can you stand up, TCA?
Yeah,
Sorry, but
okay. My name is Srinivas Raghu, and I'm from the Hindu Business Line. I have two brief questions. One is, has Europe at all tried to learn from the Indian experience? Because we have very similar problems to yours in managing a large number of states, which are not independent, of course. I won't go into the detail. And the second question is, who, according to you, in Europe, is the most recalcitrant and difficult country to manage in the process of getting a consensus? And if you could tell us how you're going to do it, we might learn a few lessons from you too.
On your first, I think we all have to learn from each other. And we can up to a point. That's also why it's very useful to have now the G20 as a global institution that really tries to manage many of these issues. I think the G7 that tried to do it up to 5-6 years ago were too narrowly defined. The G20 includes the key emerging market economies, and we can all learn from each other. But the setup of economic and monetary union is very special, and therefore I think we have to draw our own conclusions, which we are trying to do. Countries that get into trouble on the budgetary side, competitiveness, that is more the traditional problem that also countries have that have to go to the IMF. And many countries have done this during the last 40 years. But we have the special feature in the euro area that the exchange rate is not available as an adjustment instrument. That's why we had to develop the system of cuts in nominal income to regain competitiveness quickly. It's working better than many people expected. That's why we have these improvements in competitiveness that I just talked about. And we have, in addition, the governance issues for the euro area as a whole. We needed stricter rules on fiscal coordination, better financial market supervision. We did not have any crisis mechanism. We thought we wouldn't need it, but now we established the EFSF and the ESM. So these are probably unique experiences that we had to learn ourselves. Your second question, the answer is very clear. The most difficult case we have in the euro area is Greece, for several reasons. Greece has the most difficult fundamentals. The economic situation is the most serious, the debt level is the highest, the deficit was the highest, the loss in competitiveness was the largest. So they come from a very difficult situation. They also did not tell us the truth about their data when they joined monetary union. We learned another lesson from that and gave Eurostat, the statistical arm of the European Union, much more power now to check books, so this cannot be repeated. And also, the political system in Greece is not delivering results as efficiently as in the other countries. In Ireland, Portugal, Spain, we have had changes in government during the last 18 months during the crisis, where new governments came in with a very clear reform agenda. They were elected with a mandate to implement reforms and adjustment, and the opposition is cooperating. In Greece, this has been much more difficult. Greece, in the end, has had a solvency problem, while all the other countries in Europe have only liquidity problems. That's also why the solutions we found for Greece differ. Greece is the only case, and I don't see any other country where this is needed, where private creditors were asked to accept haircuts. Substantial amounts of private claims were forgiven for Greece, more than 100 billion euros. This will not be needed for other countries. So very difficult, very special solutions therefore. And despite the adjustment Greece has been taking the last 2 years, there still remains a lot to be done.
Mr. Piyush Goyal is Member of Parliament.
Doctor, I in fact was going to say something the entire reverse of what he said. I wanted to know what we as India can learn from the European crisis. There were two specific issues that I would like to be enlightened about. Europe has, for many years after the European Union came into place, had a common tax, something like what we in India are trying to introduce as a general sales tax, a common tax across our states and the center. I think Europe is the example that is touted very often to us as what we are trying to clone. But when we go into detail, we find that within Europe, there's a lot of different rates of tax. Different states have as many as 8 rates of tax within the country as against the general rate of tax. So one, I would like to know whether you have been able to assess what impact a common tax has had on the stability of finances or on the common European Union. That was one thing. And the second, I was keen to know, is welfare state one of the reasons for Europe's decline? Can one say that the amount of welfare measures, the increasing pensions, the way the European economies have had to provide very largely for state support or state funding for unemployment, for retirement, is that one of the causes that has caused this decline in Europe so rapidly in the last 20 years? And what are the lessons a country like India, which is still an emerging economy, has to learn from what Europe has gone through? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Two very difficult questions. One could have seminars on each of the two. Taxes, you just talked about taxes. If I can describe quickly what we have in Europe, we have a fairly harmonized VAT system, value tax system, with where every country is only allowed to have 2 rates, one lower rate, typically for foodstuffs and things like that, and one normal rate. And these rates have to be within narrow margins. So countries are not free to do what they want. While on income taxes, for individuals and for corporates, we have no harmonization. This is still an area where the council can only decide something by unanimous decision. So each country has a veto right. So in that area, there's not much progress in integration. And when I talked about economic union earlier, this may well be an area that might be tackled where more common tax rates also on income tax, on direct taxation, might be envisaged in the future. Of course, industry, businesses would like to have more similar tax systems, because a company in the European Union today that is active in all the 27 member states needs to have 27 tax lawyers, because the systems are still so different. So the benefits of having one system could be significant for such companies. For a service provider who operates only in one country, it doesn't matter. But for multinational companies that are active in several of the EU member states, that would be a big benefit. And it's one of the untapped potentials for growth in Europe. And I'm sure we will think more about this in the future. Now, your second question. Of course, I don't agree with your statement. You talked 2 or 3 times about Europe's decline. There is no decline in Europe in terms of standard of living. I hinted at that in my presentation. It's very important to look at GDP growth per capita, because that's the measurement for how standard of living develops. And when you do that, when you basically take out demographic trends, where Europe is doing very poorly, Germany has already had a decline in population the last 5 years. And for the euro area as a whole, it's almost stable. And in a few years, population will decline for the EU as a whole. While in the US, not to speak of your country, the population is increasing, and that contributes to potential growth. But policymaking is concerned about standard of living. And therefore, the measurement of GDP per capita is a relevant one. And when you look at that, Europe, compared to the US as a benchmark, has not had any decline. I know it's widely perceived to be different, but it's just one of the many wrong facts about Europe. So therefore, also your statement that welfare systems in Europe have contributed to the decline cannot be right.
Decline in stability, economic stability.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. There's one interesting phenomenon really that even within the EU, within Europe, we have different economic and social models. So Northern European countries have a very developed welfare system and still have very low unemployment. They have a high public sector share in the economy, but the population seems to be happy to pay high taxes. So the strongly developed welfare system does not lead to fiscal deficits. It's fully financed. And then it has no negative impact on the economy. It's a problem if a country tries to have this kind of welfare, social protection, but people are not willing to pay for it. I think that's when you run into problems. So one has to be very differentiated here. Different societies have different preferences. If they are willing to pay for it, one should not criticize it. We have good examples. Nordic countries, the highest productivity levels in Europe, despite the large share of the public sector. This may not work in the US, I don't know, but it works well in Northern European countries. So one can have these differences, and it does not have to lead to financial instability or to a decline in the economy.
Klaus, let me ask you the last question, because I'm sorry we have to stop here because he has a flight to catch, an early dinner and flight to catch. I'll draw you a little away from pure economics into the area that we at the IISS are interested, which is a little bit of geopolitics. I heard you mention a couple of times that there's an Anglo-Saxon view of what's happening in Europe, which you do not approve of. The question I have is, do you see a change in the relationship as a result of the crisis and the management of the crisis? One, between Europe and the US, and two, between Europe and China, considering China has become an increasingly important player in Europe, buying many of your bonds, but buying up many of your companies, actively looking for opportunities in Europe. In Greece, they were very active. Do you see any geopolitical consequences as a result of the way in which the US on the one hand, or the Anglo-Saxon world on the one hand, and China on the other hand, are responding to the crisis in Europe?
Well, I see, of course, big shifts in the world economy and of the relative importance of the important players, but not necessarily because of the crisis. For me, the crisis is a temporary phenomenon anyway. Many may not believe that, but I think it's one of the characteristics of a crisis that when you are in the middle of it, you don't know how to get out of it. That's a characteristic of a crisis. If you know exactly what to do and exactly what happens the next 18 months, then it will not be a crisis. For me, it's a temporary phenomenon. We will get out of it. There will also be another crisis one day in Europe and other parts of the world economy. It's part of our economic system, but we have to try to minimize. Let me also say I'm critical of Anglo-Saxon views in many respects, but I want to be clear, the US government knows that they have a strong interest in financial stability in Europe. They do not want the euro to disappear, the US government. They may have different views on some economic policies. We have a traditional differences in philosophy on macroeconomic policies in Europe and continental Europe, not new, maybe more pronounced now, but not new. So let's abstract from the crisis. Apart from that, it's clear that emerging economies are increasingly playing a stronger role. I already talked about the G20. We know that the relative importance of the developed world, of the old industrialized world, is declining. This is particularly true for Europe, even more so given our demographics. On the demographics, there's one really striking number that at the beginning of the last century, European population accounted for 20% of world population. Right now, it's 11%. At the end of the century, it will be 4%. 20, now 11, we are moving to 4. That is one indicator that Europe's importance in relative terms will shrink. It does not mean that standard of living shrinks, because on a per capita basis, we will still have growth. But the industrialized developed world will shrink, and emerging economies, China of course, but also India, will be doing much, much better. Brazil is another example where the economy has been doing very well. But Brazil also, and there are other countries like Indonesia, which are becoming a big success story, but countries like Indonesia and Brazil also remind me of another fact. These countries, not so long ago, Indonesia in 1998, Brazil in the early 90s and the 80s, had serious macroeconomic crisis. Also, they didn't know how to get out of it. They managed. With the help of the IMF, they had to undergo serious structural reforms. The IMF was often accused of doing the wrong things, but these structural reforms helped these economies. I think without the structural reforms that Indonesia adopted in 1998, controversial reforms, but without those reforms, Indonesia would not be today where they are. And I think the same is happening in southern European countries. These countries undergo very tough adjustment, very painful for the population, but it will be the basis for better future developments. And for me, therefore, the experience of Indonesia, Brazil are good examples of what is possible with the right policies, which are painful initially, but then lead to success. But overall, the trend is clear. The importance of emerging markets will improve strongly, will continue to improve. It's important, therefore, that we work together closely. I think the G20 is therefore a very useful body. I hope that in the monetary area, we are moving towards a multipolar monetary system, not a system where the last 50 years the dollar dominated before the UK pound dominated the world economy. It will not be one currency that dominates. It will be several, including the dollar, including the euro, one day including the renminbi, maybe one day including the rupee, the Brazilian real. That seems to be a realistic proposal for the next few decades, and I think that could work well for the world economy.
Thank you. Let me go to the podium. I will use the podium since we are recording this for our website. Klaus, John, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted that we've started off the IISS Oberoi Lecture series with the first lecture by Klaus Regling this evening. I have a personal debt to Klaus. We were colleagues at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, spent 1 year together in the corridors of the Lee Kuan Yew School. And therefore, I'm personally very happy, Klaus, that you made the trip to Delhi to Bombay from Luxembourg. We chose Bombay or Mumbai as the home for the IISS Oberoi Lectures because both John Chipman, the Director General of the IISS, and Mr. Oberoi, who has just stepped out, I notice, Mr. PRS Oberoi, believe that Bombay is ready for a dialogue, a platform that would look at the larger issues, not just about the way markets move, not just about the way in which corporates function and behave, but there is increasing interest, particularly given that so many Indian businesses are now moving out of India, buying up businesses around the world, entering new markets in Southeast Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, in Europe, that there is increasing interest in this city in geopolitical and geoeconomic issues. The IISS sees itself as a platform in this city to bridge the gap between the world of business and the world of geopolitics. I have several debts of gratitude. I will just take 2 minutes and invite you for cocktails. First and foremost, I must thank Mr. Oberoi and his son Vikram, who very graciously and very enthusiastically responded to our suggestion that we host the IISS Oberoi Lecture Series at the Oberoi, or that we partner and work together to launch this series. We met sometime in December, and within 6 months, we've been able to put this project in motion. And therefore, I'm grateful to him and to the Oberoi team led by Mr. Devendra Burma in Bombay and all his colleagues who have made this evening possible. I'd also like to thank Mr. Chipman, of course, because he's sitting in London, guided us in the way in which we ought to organize this. This entire event is a branded event. We have a similar lecture in Singapore, the IISS Fullerton Lecture, and you're all welcome to go to our website, the www.iiss.org, where all the Fullerton lectures are available, are webcast. And we will do these lectures in Mumbai in the next couple of years. And even this lecture is being, in fact, webcast. Apart from Mr. Chipman in London, we had Eli Jup from our office in Bahrain and Suvi Dogra from my office in Delhi, who actually have made this possible. Third, my gratitude to Ambreen Khan and associates for the help they've given in organizing the event this evening. Finally, of course, my gratitude to each one of you. I'm very grateful to you on a day like this when Mumbai was brought to a halt in the middle of the day. We were quite nervous how many people would be able to make it from the Worli and the BKC area to this part of Bombay because of the disruption to traffic. So I'm really grateful to all of you, to Governor Subbarao for being here with us, to Mr. G.M. Rao, who incidentally is a corporate member of the IISS, to Mukul, who's on the verge of becoming a corporate member, and hopefully to the others here who will also join the example of both Mr. Rao and Mukul and become corporate members of the IISS. You have a folder on your chair which will tell you what exactly is the corporate membership and what are the benefits of that membership. Thank you very much. Please join us for cocktails just behind the screen. And